Alright, so this is a quick update on the Airline 62120 chassis. And if it wasn't already apparent, I have been reassembling it with all the freshly painted and polished components. We've got both of the transformers back into place, so the antenna coil is back inside, the IF can back here has all been reassembled. I got some spade bolts to reattach this can permanently to the base again, since the original lugs are broken off. Tube shields have been painted and reinstalled. New wiring to the transformers for the two grid caps there. The third isn't ready yet because I don't have the wiring there done. And the tuning capacitor has been readjusted and installed. It'll probably need to be aligned, obviously, once I get that far. And I've got some temporary knobs on here so I can fiddle with things. But the operation is smooth so far. And the last thing to really do with this is to get the other three tube sockets cleaned up and reinstalled. I've already got the screws for that, although I am out of the number 6 screws I need to finish reassembling. There's a few terminal strips. I borrowed some screws to complete some other parts of it and wound up short. So until I get that from the hardware store, I'll be stuck waiting, but I'll probably complete that over the weekend. So yeah, I've got those 3 sockets to do, got to put the transformers back in, but the amount of stuff that's actually left is pretty minute. I mean, it's a wad of wire about that big, and that's all there is to it. All the other sockets been cleaned up. The speaker over here is ready to go. Now I found something interesting out about this when looking at the schematic. I just assumed because it was a 4-prong UX type plug that this used an electrodynamic speaker. It was pretty common for that era to have it. But this is a battery set, and an electrodynamic speaker would just be a pretty good drain on that. And while looking at the schematic, I realized that nowhere in the power supply circuit did there appear to be a field coil for that speaker, and in fact the connections for that plug are not even listed. It simply shows the speaker symbol and a impedance matching transformer going to the plates of the output tube, the 19, which is a dual triode. Kind of an interesting design. And I realized by looking at it that what they've done is on the primary side of the transformer, the center tap is fed with B+, the 135 volt connection, and then the 2 outer taps are connected to the plates of the 19 and push-pull setup. So, you know, it's kind of a neat way to do it. Not exactly a beam power pentoid or anything fancy, but you still get push-pull output with a battery set, so that's a plus. And then that output is fed directly to the voice coil, but I realized, looking at the connections underneath the chassis, that the reason for this socket having 4 terminals is that 3 of them, the 2 plate connections and then the high voltage center tap to B+, actually go to the speaker, because in the images that I could find of the radio complete in the cabinet is that the transformer is mounted on the speaker, which is pretty typical. The chassis is kind of tiny, so there really wasn't any space to house it. And so yeah, all I need is I'm banking on being able to use a cheap Radio Shack audio transformer with, you know, like a 1100 ohm primary and an 8 ohm secondary to drive it. Although that does mean I either have to use alligator clips or I'll have to get like a busted 4-pin base tube or something to make a socket adapter with, because I don't have the original. Kind of unfortunate, but you know, it's not something you see everywhere. And I'll probably have to, I don't know, I may not bother with making a dial scale or just leave it alone. But I would like to mount this on a piece of wood at some point, make that clean. Then we flip it over, we can see what's been done. Not a whole lot, really. We got this transformer here reinstalled. Please tilt this up a little bit here. Got the oscillator coil put in there, and you can see there's supposed to be a terminal strip right here with a few last connections from the antenna coil, 2 more capacitors on that side. And then we've got those 3 sockets, the transformer that goes here, the transformer that goes there, and then the wiring for the A connection and the C connections out through those ports. There's really not a whole lot. I've been using new wiring where it's been necessary. If I cut a connection, like say here, I try to find a comparable color, install it. But if I can manage it, I try to avoid using new wire, like here. So have the original blue connection, so save as much of that as possible. And yeah, it's all coming along very nicely. The real trick is going to be setting up a power supply for this. I don't exactly have the money to throw it in an ARBE3 battery eliminator, as much as I'd like to have one of those. I don't have a lot of battery sets that require that. So what I'll probably do is just figure out a way to rig up a bunch of 9-volt batteries to generate the high voltage I need, or use I do have a voltage tripler circuit that I use for powering Decatrons that can provide almost 400 volts DC. If I crank that down the Variac or use a resistive voltage divider, I might be able to get the B plus voltage I need, although it probably wouldn't be able to supply anywhere near as much current as I would like. I'm probably better off setting up some sort of a wacky system of batteries. So that's all for now. The next update I'll throw in here will be hopefully with the rest of the guts reinserted and the radio fully reassembled. So I was looking forward to that. Alright, so as you probably noticed, the 62-120 Airline chassis is all put back together, with one exception or two. I don't have the A battery connections. I didn't have a wire the right gauge to use for it, or the right color. I'm going to get some larger red and black wiring for the main battery. But all of the other bias wiring, antenna, and all the B plus wiring on the other side is completed. All of the grid caps have received new wiring and new solder connections, and they have been deoxidized in a derusting bath. Tuning capacitor fully installed. Both the coils have been properly wired back up. I was looking at all my doodles that I made of all the connections and specifications, and I've scrounged some knobs that I got a while ago for to use for this to make it look halfway decent. So power switches over here. We've got our volume control on this side, and then of course the tuning, which works very smoothly. Although I have to say it is rather obnoxious when you deal with a tuning system that is in reverse, so if you are twisting the knob to the right, you're tuning towards the lower end of the band, and there's a reason why other companies opted to put a third gear in there so that when you did tune, you were actually tuning in the same direction you wanted to. Zenith was nice about that, although it does mean there's a big clockwork assembly behind the dial. Not that I mind that. The other thing is I still don't have another 30 tube for this, and I need to get, if we flip this around here, I need to get a 4-pin tube base to make a speaker adapter for. I mean, I could just solder some wires in there and just have them sticking out, but I think that would look kind of cheesy. I want to go with an appropriate attachment, just the way it would have been originally, and have a UX base with sockets in there, with a pigtail going to basically a universal output transformer with a center tap. Probably want to get an actual one rather than trying those little Radio Shack deals. I'll save those for other little projects. But yeah, outside of getting a socket for that and getting a replacement 30 tube to round off the remaining components, oh, and the battery wiring, take a look on the underside here and see how we fared. And everything went right back where it should. I was pretty happy with that. I replaced as little wire on the inside connections as I could manage. So where we do have, if I actually lift this up and bring it forward here, where there is new wiring, like this yellow stuff here, this blue stuff going to that coil, you know, I tried to use as little as possible. All the capacitors have been replaced. I've been checking resistances, coils all have continuity, and I have actually done some preliminary testing to check and see whether the radio would actually work. To a degree, I made some pretty poor quality videos. I'm not sure if we'll use them or not. Basically, I rigged up a very haphazard setup for the the B plus and C minus voltages using a lantern battery, 9 volt for most of the negative biases, and my power supply to try and get like negative 12 volts instead of negative 22, and my booster circuit for the high voltage, which got kind of close. And I did actually, with the oscilloscope hooked up to the oscillator section, I was actually able to see the oscillator in operation, and tuning the dial here increased and decreased the frequency. So I was very pleased with that. And the problem with this is I tried hooking up a speaker to output audio without considering the fact that without the 30 tube in there, the audio driver, the 30 tube is the audio driver. It's the preamp stage for the primary power output. Without it in there, the set will get no audio out. So I had a miniature AAA battery powered audio amp with a 3.5mm jack, and I basically just tied the grid connection for the 30 tube to that to see if we could actually get any noticeable audio output. And with the scope probe on the detector section and passing a signal through the antenna with my signal generator, you can actually see it spike and see the modulation from that signal generator being passed through the stages, and you can tune it with the set. So for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty sure that once I get a power or a battery eliminator built for this, it should be very easy to tune and to align. At least I'm hoping so. There's really not a lot on it now that I think about it. In fact, these IF stages have no tunable portions. I believe the only ones that do are the 3 trimmers on top of the tuning condenser, and then there is one at the very back, although I believe that's a hum adjust. Probably not for the local oscillator. So yeah, local oscillator, then there's one for one of the stages, maybe one for an IF stage. But yeah, there's not a lot of adjustments to do on this thing, so it's either going to work or it's not, and I'm leaning towards it working. Now, I did have a bit of a goof in my haste to get this thing tested, make sure all my A connections were sound. I clipped some leads into the A battery connections on one of the sockets, and I connected a 6-volt lantern battery to it, and then flipped the switch to see if the filaments would come up, and they did. And they were nice and bright and looked great. And then I powered them down and I did a search on the 30 tube, and it suddenly occurred to me all the tubes in this set are not 6-volt filament, they are all 2-volt filament tubes. Very important difference, and they are not connected Christmas tree light fashion. They are all in parallel, so I was driving them at 3 times their rated voltage and probably 3 times their rated current once they got going. Thankfully, I did not damage any of them. Tube filaments, being thorium tungsten, are actually pretty okay with that sort of abuse, I guess. And I didn't destroy any of these tubes, because most of these are most likely original to the set. So, yeah, just need to get myself a 30, stick that in there, and then I'm already working on a schematic for a power supply, but I'll have to buy well, I'm probably going to buy the Antique Electronics Supply pine board tube battery eliminator kit. It's like $50 or something, and it comes with the transformer and the regulators and a Zener diode ladder to give you all your B plus voltages and that. But I've got a schematic worked up on some changes I want to make, because the one thing that the kit does not have is multiple C voltages. Most old battery sets maybe had like 1 C voltage. And while the kit has an adjustable, like an LM317 regulator output for 0, like 1.5 to 32 volts-ish, that's handy, but I need -6, -9, and -22. I don't need just the 1. So I would like to add, basically skip having just the 1 adjustable gauge and build 3, so that whenever you have a battery set that needs them, you can make them. And then some simplification to the well, not the A supply, but the B supply, which has this complicated regulation system in place that is honestly not all that necessary. It's not a very high-end device. The Zener ladder with the appropriate dropping resistor and all that should probably work okay. But it should be noted, I saw a lot of comments on website saying that the voltages listed, which are 135, 90, 67, 45, and 22, oh, they're never accurate. Well, of course they're not accurate. You're stacking 22-volt Zener diodes on top of each other to get those potentials, and while those may be the ones that the radio lists as being what they want, and you go at 67.5 on the lead here, and you got 135, you stack those 22-volt resistors, you're going to get 22, 44, 66, 88, and then another 2 of those will bring you up to 132 volts. So no, you are never going to get the rated voltage that your radio might want, but in all likelihood, it's probably not going to give a damn either way. Once the plate voltage is up where it ought to be, so long as your bias voltages are good, I'm pretty sure everything else will be fairly forgiving. Tubes are, if not fairly forgiving when it comes to supply voltages, except on the filament. And their filament supply is just an LM317 regulator. Nothing fancy. It'll handle an amp and a half if pushed. So that'll be the next step in getting this to work, is just getting and building a battery eliminator. And I have a few battery sets that I'd love to hear but don't have the proper supplies for, and that'll make it possible to listen to this. Also, I do want to get a wooden board or something to mount this thing on, because I don't have the cabinet. And I've never seen photos of another one of these around or for sale or even on the internet. This is apparently a fairly uncommon set, so I'll probably never find anything to actually put it in that looks decent. So I'm going to find a nice plaque board, maybe at Michael's or at a craft store, get it screwed down, and then make some sort of a setup so that you can either plug an RCA jack in for the speaker, because once you have an 8 ohm impedance matched transformer, it should be easy to interface it with any other speakers you might want. Or I was thinking of actually making a bracket to put behind and up and over the set, where you could mount a modern permanent magnet speaker, or maybe an older permanent magnet speaker, something that looks right, a nice rounded cone one, and play it that way. Maybe if I get my Majestic speaker all finished, or I could hook up like I would be interested to know what it sounds like with an RCA Model 100 hooked up to it. This would probably not require much of an impedance match. Wow, okay, yeah, it would, but the voice coil on that is around 1,000 plus ohms, so wouldn't really work that well. But that's beside the point. The fact is the set's all back together, and I clear-coated the 2 IF cans after I got them cleaned up. I haven't done anything to the tuning capacitor in terms of clear-coating. I thought about it, but by the time I had done these two, I had also already put the tuning cap on there and wired it in, so yeah, kind of lost concentration there. Oops. Oh, and I did, at some point, I need to look online and see if I can print off a picture. I want to put the original Radio Manufacturers Association gold seal that used to be back on it. There was some additional factory stamping, like saying tested and the model number, that got removed in the cleaning process. I hate doing that, but the chassis was covered in rodent debris, so I needed to get it off there for cleanliness' sake. But I would like to put that RMA sticker back on there, make it feel a little more complete. And yeah, I did actually also, the tube sockets were all pretty nasty, and I spent some more time, and I got all of those completely scraped off and scrubbed, and I'll need to get some white Tester's model paint to fill those in with. But it's not necessary, but I like touches like that. But yeah, I think this will make a fantastic demonstration piece. I'd like to be able to have it up and running so that I can show it maybe at a lab or something. But yeah, this turned out much better than I expected it would. For $10, I think I did pretty decent.